Evening all. Okay, welcome to the King's Crusher radio show. I'm just going to click start on the Play Chess server to be so there's two audiences. There's Twitch TV, which I'm allowed to relay to, but the primary audience is on the Play Chess server. So I'm just going to check if sound is available. Hi all. Evening all on Play Chess. Hi there. I thought we would have a look at Kramnik, actually. Switch to Kramnik for that Olympiad in 1992. He was just a FIDE master, but completely underrated. Well, rather, he had a high FIDE rating at 2590, but his FIDE title had not caught up. It was just a FIDE master at the time. Hi, Imus. Hi all. Okay. Oh, we've got a FIDE master with us temporarily there. Okay, so in this week's broadcast, we're going to have a bit of a culture shock for me because between Kramnik and Kasparov as Bg2 Bg4 or other systems, Kramnik is a much greater fan of Slav Defense structures. And we're going to see how dangerous Slav Defense structures are, actually, because we're going to have a look at Kramnik with the black pieces in particular this week, and how he could, get solid but aggressive positions with black. Okay, so his opponent in this first game is Dizdarevic from BIH. What's the country code for BIH? Dizdarevic was 2505, so Kramnik 2590, but FIDE master title. Okay, so knight f3 from Dizdarevic, or shall we call him Emir from now on for short. So Emir plays knight f3, Vladimir plays d5, and after g3 we see a kind of tendency for a solid occupation of the centre and supporting that centre pawn with this c6 move, which in this position will blunt also, of course, the bishop, the fianchettoed bishop. So bishop g2, but before closing in this c8 bishop, the bishop's taken outside of the pawn chain with bishop g4. Okay, but you might ask, there's a problem with this surely, that this bishop's for a moment a tactical target, maybe to knight e5. This is demonstrated by the game continuation, knight e5. Bishop goes to h5 simply, and then we see d4. Bosnia-Herzegovina is the country code. Thanks for that, Imus. So d4, and then we see knight d7, challenging that e5 knight, which just retreats to d3 here. Knight Gf6. Black looks quite solid though in this position. This knight on d3 looks kind of interesting, but from a functional perspective, okay, what is it threatening? Knight f4 to harass this bishop. It's keeping an eye on these key squares. Castles e6. Okay, now knight d2, and now bishop d6. So it looks like a harmonious structure for black here with no problems. So why play King's Indian when you can have a position like this? It's this formidable triangle we're seeing more and more in high-level Grandmaster games of the Slav, which really gives black control of central squares, important squares. There's no bishop issue here in this variation though. Bishop outside of the pawn chain, kind of useful for discouraging any e4s or slowing it down, the move e4. White plays c4. Now castles, and now b3, which gives the idea that if white can exert more influence on e5, maybe knight e5 later is going to be useful. a5, which looks as though, is black actually going to pick up some counterplay with a4 later? After bishop b2, he plays queen e7, and now rook e1 is played. Now if the queen moves, say here, then e4 might be on the cards later. Kramnik here plays an interesting move, b5. Okay, is he trying to encourage c5 from white? Is he going to tear open like a b file? Queen c2. For a moment he victimizes the queen again. It was victimized there, and now it's victimized on this diagonal with bishop g6. Which means, of course, the knight's pinned, which means e5 might be playable soon to try and exploit the pin on the d3 knight. Okay, e4 is played. And now we see some simplification. Knight takes e4, knight takes, bishop takes. So quite a few minor pieces coming off. So what has black achieved here? He plays now a4, so he's squeezing a bit on the queen side. His king's kind of safe. White's king has got a little bit of a vacuum, which is not very exploitable. It's not really that relevant, this feature of the position, because black hasn't got a light square bishop or anything. But okay, so what's going on here? White plays now c5, and the bishop can just go to b8 here, and there's no major, it's not a major target on the b file or anything like we've seen in a recent World Championship match. It's not going to be lost on b8 in this position anytime soon. It's blunted by this pawn on g3. Okay, maybe, you know, later, I don't know, a7 could be useful if c5 is weak later, but at the moment also one feature is this d5 square. Can that be used with a knight? Can this d file be used for picking d4 up? So we see actually knight b4 though attacking the vulnerable c6 pawn, which is now protected humbly with rook c8. So in this position, okay, black has achieved a solid looking position without too many issues, it seems. This bishop's hemmed in by its own pawn. This pawn's potential target, but at the moment c6 is an issue. Okay, rook a e1, and now we see knight f6, which would help solve black's problems. If he can get rid of this knight on b4, then maybe this rook can come back to d8 soon to target d4, because that is a pawn on a semi-open file. Rook h4, as though there's some sort of attacking intention. h6, because maybe, you know, white was actually threatening d5, bishop takes, and then queen takes there. So h6 just makes sure everything's okay. Bishop c3, which actually has this idea of maybe again going on the attack. So this guy, this 2505, is quite aggressive for going for the opponent's king here. It doesn't look as though it's the sort of position one necessarily ought to go for the king, but what else is there for white to do? He's got quite a fixed pawn structure here. So now we see rook a7, which is a nifty way of getting the rook back to the center to start attacking that d4 pawn maybe. Queen c1. Again, it seems crude eyeing of h6 here. AB, AB, and now rook d7. And now we see this battery bishop d2, as though bishop takes h6 is really on the cards. And the FIDE master at the time, Kramnik, is he going to really get hacked here because of bishop, this battery, because of bishop takes h6? Really? He plays in this position queen f8 simply. So queen f8 looks as though it's asking for something here, a tactic, which white plays. But Kramnik simply, you know, he is eyeing d4 here with his rook. So is there going to be some tactic against his king which would loosen d4 for white here? Well, actually, can I just quickly ask, let's take a straw poll. Who thinks white's actually better here? Or is black better here? In terms of dynamic attacking play and in terms of structural weaknesses as well, if you could qualify who's better, that would be really cool. So if I give you 20 seconds, do you want to like check the position and give an evaluation? So who's better, white or black? What do you reckon? Anyone? Equal? Okay, white does something quite you know, radical here, based on a tactic like he plays rook takes h6, believe it or not. So okay, from one point of view, you know, if he did take, then bishop takes, and it looks nasty because the bishop's attacking the queen, and then there's queen g5 and slaughter time, yeah. But he has got the weakness of the last move here. You know, the rook is not defending d4. He just plays rook takes d4 here. Okay, now he's really threatening to take the bishop and then just take. So the rook stumbles back. And now knight e4 again, targeting the bishop. And the bishop's also having to protect the knight here. Bishop c3. Knight takes c3 is used. Queen takes. And we see queen d8. And funny enough, this is a kind of recurring pattern, what you've seen here in this situation. That look at how Kramnik now dominates the d file. His king's quite safe. These pieces are awkward. This rook looks very silly for a moment, and you know, maybe, you know, these dark squares are going to be subject to attack. Maybe, you know, bishop a7 later, or the bishop can use e5 later if the rook wasn't on it. So the dark square control and the central control is something which perhaps gives black the better chances now. So the knight goes actually to a6 here, and then we see queen f6, which seems to threaten immediately actually rook d1, because if rook takes, then you take the queen, and if queen takes, you just take the rook with check. So it looks as though rook d1's a threat which needs to be parried. King g2 is played, and now rook c d8, and we see this again. Look at this d-file possession, could be quite useful. Immediately rook d3 is also potentially useful, you know, for queen f3. So rook e3 stops, perhaps that's the main intention, to stop rook d3. But now we see bishop e5. Maybe, you know, white didn't even have time there in this position to take on b8, because of rook d3 would be no, he could take here, pardon me, he can take on f6, forget that. So rook e3, bishop e5, and now white plays queen a5. But now we do get the move rook d3 here, okay, which looks as though, you know, black's trying to get access to either f2 or f3, get some coordination. This rook's not helping on h3 here, is it? It doesn't look particularly great. But now g4 at least sort of tries to bring it into the game, protecting e3. But this g4 is a bit of a liability, and it's picked on immediately with this next move, attacking g4, and it looks quite bad actually now for white. White's getting smashed actually after rook ef3. Okay, maybe, you know, black doesn't want to take on g4 here because this queen's eyeing d8. He can exert more pressure on g4 first. He can play queen g6, okay, and maybe take with his queen, and this is what happens. Queen b6. I mean, what's the queen doing over here as well? It looks a bit silly, this position. So queen b6, check, and this looks diabolical because, you know, this back row attack. So white gives up the exchange. Bishop takes g3, hg, and now a very, very nasty pin, which not only pins but also protects c6. But white goes for that c6 with knight b4 again, okay, but and is also protecting against rook d3. But but now really crushing, kingside attack with rook d2 is initiated, offering c6, but at a huge price for white's king safety here. So queen takes c6 is played, and I wonder if you can guess the next move. I hope those on Play Chess can avoid looking at the notation. If you go to another tab like opening book, so we can do these guess the move quizzes. So if I give you 20 seconds, what did black play here in this position? 20 seconds starting from now. Yeah, many of you are guessing now. Okay, it's official maelstrom. Yeah, rook takes f2, crushing. After takes check, this is all over. Because if king, this position white resigned. If king here, then I think queen e1 check. You drag the rook back, and then you just play queen takes g3. Queen can't come in, and then you just mate. So that's pretty nasty stuff. If king f1, then you've got actually immediately queen b1 mate. So what did we just witness? Really, what did we just witness? Did black take any risk in the opening? It seemed black had a rock solid position right from the start of this game, with hardly any weaknesses. To get a tool to the black king, white ended up decentralizing, rooks. And black seems to even have some pressure on the queen side in this game, even if white didn't do that. So what a solid way to win a game. Sometimes if you look at Karpov games, they weren't given counterplay opponents. These grandmasters didn't just win. You look at the games later and what chance was given to the opponent. The same you could say maybe of Kramnik. What chance was given for white in this game? No hyper modern stuff, just classical stuff, occupying central squares and just trying to sort of later win the center. And he did. These initial exchanges, what the result of these initial exchanges was basically d4 being a liability. If you think about it, that was the result of the exchanges. c6 wasn't such a liability, but d4 is a pronounced liability in this position. Just structurally, okay, d4 is a target. There's a road to d4. There's an access route, the d file. So and we see that become more and more evident. But black did have to grovel a bit, protecting his c6 pawn. But with some nifty maneuvers, this d4 is highlighted as a major structural weakness. If you think about this game, white's decentralization doesn't seem very convincing to get some sort of hack attack. Okay, he against a lesser player allowing d5 and bishop f6. Yeah, sure, this would work. But here, okay, he does get this like battery to try and take on h6, but it's like an attempted hack attack, really, isn't it? So rook a7, the structural target versus the king. So he's gone for the structural target, but with this structural target is also the whole of the d file, and with the d file, you get points to attack white's king. So really, it's as if it's not just the structural target; it's the start of white's king safety downfall. If you can control this d file, knock out d4. Get both your rooks on this file, then you'll have f2, f3 as targets. So bishop d2, what, you can't highlight just one mistake. I think it's just the whole thing structurally. It looks to be going downhill for white here, just structurally. So white's like, induced into this hack attack now. He loses d4, he loses the d file. And with that, entrance points to white's king are generated pretty soon after. This queen d8 is quite nifty for queen f6 though, to start to get to f2. So queen f6, okay, and then this d-file domination. So that structural target is just the start of even more torture here for white's king. So rook e3, bishop e5, and with bishop e5, okay, what sort of threats have we got here? Maybe we've got rook e4 on the cards to attack the queen. There might be some other stuff, or just rook d2, because then you just take on f2, mating like that. So rook d2, already f2 is a liability to rook d2 here. So queen a5 got out of the way. Okay, and you know, if rook d2 here, then queen f3 defends f2 and attacks the queen. Potentially, but rook d3, now g4. What else is there? This is just the most, you know, ridiculous rook now on h3. You know, what is this rook doing on h3? Okay, the queen tactically is waiting to pounce on some mistake by black, maybe, but black's quite careful to keep his rooks protecting each other. So queen g6, queen b6, as though c6 is an issue of significance, but he's losing the exchange now, and with that nasty pin, and now finally, you know, white's king safety is the next thing to go. f2, look, this pawn's actually stopping protection of f2 if that pawn wasn't there. So a nice rook sacrifice to culminate everything that preceded, but I don't know, it's kind of witnessing a kind of masterful win without much counterplay. The structural target d4 collapsing, d5 collapsing, then king safety going after that. I don't know what you guys thought. Was that kind of interesting as a way of winning with black? How many of you have won with black like that before? It's quite crushing, really, isn't it? This style of play. So anyway, let's go on to onto another game. So again with black, you know, this is where he got a 2900 performance, and he won many games with black. He got a 2900 plus performance in this Olympiad. It was higher than Kasparov, his performance rating. Can I load this PGN in? Okay. So against Georgiades from Georgia, GEO, I know that one. It's a 25-25 this time. Remember, Kramnik's 25-90. So D4, and again we see this kind of iron occupation of the centre. None of this hyper modern, you know, stuff. Forget all that. Yeah, just occupying the centre. Knight c3, knight f6. After knight f3, we see semi-Slav with this pawn triangle. Bishop voluntarily getting locked in for a moment. e3. Okay, so knight bd7, queen c2. Bishop d6. Okay, standard looking position. Bishop e2, both sides now castle. And of course we saw Anand playing this kind of structure with black and playing for e5. We've just seen that in the recent World Championship match. e5 is a little bit more prepared though. In this position maybe e5 suffers to something. I'm not entirely sure. It might be playable. But he played rook e8. Maybe it's a matter of preference. Rook e8. And after rook d1, again, he doesn't play e5 here. He plays queen e7, as though he's going to play e5 in his own time. b3, and okay, is he going to play e5 here? The problem is here that maybe white takes and plays knight b5 and hits the bishop, and then bishop a3 on the diagonal. if we just demonstrate that, say say e5 here takes, whoops, c takes, we've got knight b5, haven't we? So bishop moves back, we've got bishop a3 now. Yeah, that's pretty nasty. So he's not that keen to play e5 perhaps, maybe because of this reason. He plays actually b6. And we see white breaking in the centre first with e4. Okay, remember the previous game though, structurally, you know, with all these exchanges, we're going to have d-file, d4 as an issue, potentially. So knight takes e4. So structurally, we've got the same structural, you know, maybe centre, or maybe, you know, just dark squares in general are going to be in black's favour later if black plays something like c5. This d4 is still an excuse for attacking dark squares in the position. So bishop b7, if black can break with c5 later and pierce into the dark squares, again f2 even might be an issue. So knight e5, knight f6, attacking the queen. Queen moves back, and now we see c5. You see, look, the dark squares are being undermined. If this bishop got onto this diagonal, f2 is going to be weaker. The bishops look good here. Again, they look quite good. Bishop b2, and now rook ad8. He wants to try and, you know, intensify pressure on the dark squares, and d4. Bishop f3. Okay, so we see here c takes d4, and black is immediately getting access to the c5 square potentially. So bishop takes d4. He doesn't mind a light square bishop exchange. And now queen c7 exerts immediate tactical threat of winning the knight. And okay, is the knight being invited into c6 here? That's the question, which is tested by the game continuation. But what else is there here? If the knight moves back, then we've got bishop takes h2 check and take the bishop. Look, d4 is really collapsing with a piece on it here. So you can't move the knight back. You don't want to lose a pawn to knight g4. You just take and then bishop h2. So knight c6. Okay, it attacks the rook. An inconvenienced rook, like we saw in the previous game. Slightly inconvenienced. Rook d7. And he's also offering, of course, structural damage. But he wouldn't be able to take as the knight. But he does go in for bishop takes f6. So what do we have now? We have this dark square bishop against the knight. g3. Rook c8, evicting the knight back a bit. And now we see, okay, there's a threat maybe of knight b5. And now a nifty little move, a6. Because, you know, if queen takes f6 here, we have bishop e5, I believe. And just winning on the spot, is it? If queen h4, then we can exert even more pressure on this d-file, and that's pretty nasty stuff. So you see the dark squares, the d4 strategy being unveiled already in these variations. So a6, okay, is white going to get in trouble because of this dark square bishop? Rook d3, bishop e5, already nasty skewers time, protecting f6 as well, but nasty stuff is emerging here. Rook ad1, rook cd8. Okay, an invitation now to get one pair of rooks off, or both rooks off. Both rooks off is accepted as an invitation. And no, it wasn't draw agreed here. No, it wasn't draw agreed. He plays on with f5. The game continues. Okay, there's problems for white to solve here. And we're going to see here a positional grind from this position. So let's see what happens. King f1, king f8. The kings come towards the center. Okay. Queen e3. And we see with queen e3 actually, that b5 is now possible because of that loose knight, and he plays b5, and that hints that white's position might be quite fragile here. Knight b4. Okay, is it really like counter-attacking a6, or is c4 a problem? B takes c4 is played, and here we see f4. Seemingly the bishop has to move, but no, it doesn't. In this position, Kramnik just plays c takes b3. Has he just nicked a pawn? What's going on here? Yes, I think he has nicked a pawn, because if f takes e, or queen takes, we have b2, don't we? b2 looks very, very strong. Or maybe just check first even. Let's say b2. You know, how is this pawn like defended against? You know, maybe something like this, and then b1 is on the cards. So he's nicked a pawn with c takes b3. He's a pawn up, and now he plays a5. He just counters that knight. So now white's fighting for a draw all of a sudden. Check. Bishop c7, and dark square torture as well. Maybe bishop b6 to decoy the queen away from the knight. Okay, so knight e1, losing the h2 pawn now to get this check in, and another check. Okay, and getting the a5 pawn. Okay, there's a threat now of queen d8 winning the bishop. So has this been miscalculated? Black can't take on g3 because of queen d8. He plays bishop e7. Still, you know, okay, white's got an outside pawn here, but this pawn, this structure looks vulnerable. Queen c3, king g8. The knight now goes to g2, and we see h5, as though h4 is going to really undermine this pawn chain perhaps. Queen f3, check, and now queen b1. So this pawn's not going anywhere. There's going to be checks coming in, and this bishop could be a nuisance. Queen c3, queen g1. Bit of cat and mouse here. Okay, bishop c5 now. Knight e1. The king goes to h7, queen f3. King goes to g7 now. Knight g2. White's kind of passive and a pawn down, but these are double pawns. So how does black win this? How does he make inroads here? Check. He exchanges off queens here. Okay, that's a moment of change. And now in this ending, it looks as though, okay, this pawn, is it going to be good? Is the king going to glide on the light squares? King e1, king f6 is coming in, isn't it? This king might be coming in. Not immediately though. He plays e5 here, getting his double pawns undoubled. Okay, b4, bishop d6. So he is a pawn up. He's a clear pawn up now, a clearer pawn up. And g3 might be a target. b5, bishop c5, blocking the pawn, but also, you know, maybe this is handy. Knight e1, king f5, as though the king's coming to g4 now. King f1, king g4, grovel time. f5, and white actually resigns here. White is looking forward in this position, unfortunately, to h4 takes, and then maybe f4, f3 crashing through. These pawns would crash through, I believe. So another fine positional game with black, just to outplay another 2500. Let's have a look in overview and summary. Maybe it's got a kind of dry flavour to the game, but it was a win with a Slav, so you know what do you expect. So bishop d6, but it's like a solid foundation. Black again offering no immediate targets for white apart from some temporary inconvenience for his rooks. So he sort of just grounds white down. Okay, he had a seemingly visual structural issue, but it wasn't really that exploitable, it seemed. So a6, he's relying on tactics as well, that his f6 is not a problem because of bishop e5, and we get this kind of grind. The rooks come off, and this grind with b5 perhaps is instructive. Someone asked about knight d3. Knight d3 doesn't help at all, I think. Where would knight d3 help? So say here, this is queening, isn't it? Knight d3. Actually, it does help there, doesn't it? Oh. That's interesting. Knight d3 there. Let's have a look at this position. Queen b3. Just queen the pawn. Maybe check first, you know. Or maybe just queen the pawn. Is that an advantage? Just queen the pawn. Knight takes, queen takes. I'm not sure it is, because there's a check here. So you know, maybe there's a more accurate move actually. You know, in this position, instead of b2, what about check here on c4? That's queen d3, queen b4. Maybe this is slightly better. I don't know. Queen takes b4. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Okay, so that was an interesting one. So worth checking out with an engine actually, or something, just to get some concrete analysis here. Because this was the moment he nicked a pawn. He got a pawn up. Okay, so white went just the pawn down, but it was difficult anyway, and it was a long manoeuvring battle after that. So white just got ground down in the ending. So let's have a look at another game. Okay, third game for another positional kind of win with black. So this time it's against, believe it or not, Yasser Seirawan, 2600 experienced GM, United States team. Yasser Seirawan playing white. Okay, so d4, d5. After c4, actually, we're not given a Slav, we're given e6. But don't get too excited, because after knight c3, we actually see c6 here. Okay, c6 here. So voluntarily blocking the bishop. Some strong player once said, you know, why would you want to do this? But you know, the bishop can come out later. It's an iron grip on the center and on these two squares. Okay, e3, hemming in voluntarily this bishop. Now knight f6, knight f3, knight d7, a familiar setup from black. After bishop d3, he plays actually d takes c4 to solve this bishop problem. So b5 to help solve it, because now he's given that fianchetto square potentially, so for a6 and c5 and the bishop to go across the diagonal. So a6. Interestingly, Yasser, he hadn't moved the bishop to d3, which means e4 is a bit more rocky here after e4. Surely, you might ask, in this position with the bishop on e2, can black not just play b4? And he does that. He asks that question, b4. Okay, it's all theory anyway, probably. So e5. Okay, takes on c3, takes on f6. Knight takes, bishop, b takes c3. So what's going on here? Complex. Bishop d6, both sides castle. After c4 we get this lovely move which black enjoys playing, c5, which is really the start of, you know, dark square pressure, etc., control of the d file. This c5 move is key in a lot of these positions. Bishop a3. A delay of more than 10 seconds. Oh dear. Has anyone else got a delay on Play Chesso? I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure what to do my end. Maybe my internet's... I think we should make this the last game anyway. I'm feeling a bit jaded at the moment. I think we'll make this the last game. Sorry about if my internet's playing up. So Queen a5. Okay, so he's hitting that a3 bishop. Okay, and we get the dark square bishops coming off. So the situation here, he doesn't routinely capture on c5, he attacks the queen first, and now he takes on c5. Okay, so has white got pressure here on the b file in principle? What's going on here? Is black doing fine? Rook ab1, bishop d7. The bishop can come over like this. Queen e3. Not minding an isolated pawn here. But if the queen moves, you know, maybe this pawn's dangerous. So he accepts the invitation to fracture white's pawn structure. So queen takes e3 was played. Now knight e4. Which looks as though knight c3 is nice. Knight c5 is a nice blockade. Maybe even bishop a4 could be handy and rook b8. So it looks as though black is having a very nice position here. But what about the dynamics? What about this stuff on f7? Well, white moved the rook actually, so he wasn't convinced with anything on the f file. He moved the rook to defend c3. And maybe is more interested in this pawn being a feature of the position as a passed pawn. That's immediately blockaded though. Knight c5. Okay, knight d4. And it looks as though one of the ideas for white now is to get this diagonal and to get, you know, use maybe the b file at some point if this knight wasn't there. Bishop a4. Why not? It means d1 can't be contested. Bishop's out of the way over there, it's protected anyway. It looks fairly solid for black. Black can look forward to kicking the knight, maybe come down the d file. So Yasser plays seemingly lame move again, bishop d1. What is he doing with his pawn islands? Look at the pawn islands. There's one island here. 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. White actually has 4 pawn islands. Now don't let that be the dominant thing you're thinking. If I asked you who stands better here, who would you say if I give you 20 seconds here? Does white stand better or black stand better or about equal? Would you be confident in winning a game just because the opponent has more pawn islands? Is that more of a theoretical thing to most of you or a practical thing? Yeah, it's liabilities, isn't it? It's a count of liabilities. So black's done very well here. This bishop a4 was a nice positional move actually if you think about it, because it really accentuates e5 and coming down the d file in an uncontested manner if white can't play rook d1. So bishop d1. Okay, is it going to be a draw, you know, as Yasser's a GM and Vladimir is just an FM? No draw agreed. Playing on to the death here. Rook ac8, you know, there's a target immediately highlighted. This c4 pawn. Knight b3. Offering even an exchange of rooks, which is accepted. Okay. White's resting a back row mate here. So king f8, make sure that's okay. Rook d6. And the king's usefully coming to the centre. Knight e4. Offering a6 for c4, an exchange of prisoners, as Nimzovich would say here. One weakness for another. We've still got 3 pawn islands to work with here. This e3 is rather sickly, isn't it? King f1. Rook c2. Okay, rook on the 7th. Check. Check. And the king comes up here. f6. It looks kind of cozy on f6. Rook a4. Okay, knight d6, as though maybe, you know, knight f5 or knight c4 would attack e3. Knight d4, attacking the rook attacks e3 immediately. And now knight c4 attacking e3 again, victimizing that poor e3 pawn. Why not? It moves forward. Okay, g5, h3, h5. What is black doing with his pawns? Now knight e5, great spot in front of that pawn, nice blockading square, huge knight, threatening check immediately to win the rook. The rook goes away from that unfortunate square. But now rook a3, probing this pawn now. So look at this. This is horrible stuff. Is Yasser, you know, being outplayed now by this FIDE master? Yes. Check. Knight c5. So hitting e4 again. Knight b5. Is a pawn going to drop or what here? Rook at a4. Is one pawn about to drop? Knight d6. Yes, one pawn is dropping now. This is the time to win e4. So a pawn up. What can white look forward to? Is this pawn going to provide salvation or something? The king aims to herd that pawn, but the black king is going to install itself maybe on g3, and these pawns are going to be a menace. So it comes in, f5, e5, h4. The pawns are coming in here on the king side. Now offering the e pawn for the a6 one, if white wants to sort of lose a6, doesn't particularly. King g3 is coming in now. He's built a bridge really, so his king can make this move to attack g2. Okay, and now this pawn is dropping, isn't it? Potentially, it drops now. So 2 pawns up, 3 connected past pawns. The rook can even sacrifice itself now soon in some variations. Check, check, f4. Pressure is on. Rook a1, cheapo, threat of mates, that would be embarrassing. Vladimir spots that actually. He plays g2, and okay, white is just totally like lost now. After king h2, there's a threat of rook takes a6 and then g1, for example. So I don't know what to say, you know. This is amazing, you know, how to win with black in a riskless manner against GM after GM, if you think about it. From the seemingly, you know, they don't start to look aggressive, does it? This thing. Does it look aggressive, this setup? But you know, it's a solid basis to get positional trump cards with. And so what was black's first positional trump card? Really, it seems in this game, why was Yasser so keen on fragmenting his whole pawn structure with queen e3 here? Does anyone know? I don't know if he made things worse than it needed to be, or it was already quite bad. Okay, so we see this game is kind of instructive for how to exploit the opponent's pawn islands. I hope you'd say you think, and also d-file possession with this nifty bishop a4 coming up, which means any knight on d4, the eviction would try and get down the d-file as well. So it's very unpleasant for white, the whole game really, if you look at it, being sort of positionally kind of outplayed. Okay, but careful, like swapping particular weaknesses. He didn't mind going to just 3 pawn islands instead of the 4, because he got rid of his one liability, the a6 pawn, which does mean white has the a pawn, but it turned out to be, of course, too slow, that a pawn, later. So it was a demonstration on kind of how to win a rook and pawn ending here. The king's just installing itself here and the pawns are just coming up, is the basic idea. There's going to be an e3 to build that bridge across, so the king can come to g3. e3 played a role. In fact, here this would actually lose the rook, wouldn't it? Pardon me, not taking it. Check would just win the rook. Yeah. Sorry, e3 is just, it's horrible, isn't it? So the king just carried on munching the pawns. 3-1 here. It's hopeless. Right. I hope this set of 3 games emphasise something about winning with black in a solid manner this week. They weren't the most exciting games like of Mikhail Tal or something. It's a different style of chess. If you look at the games after, they're sort of, it's difficult to see how the opponents could have had opportunities in these games. They just went down, it seems, gradually from being positionally worse. Okay, I think that's it for this week. Please check out my channel, youtube.com King's Crusher. I'll upload this there. If you want further comments or questions, I might answer them there on youtube.com King's Crusher. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks very much. Have a good week. See you next Tuesday, same time. Thanks very much. Comments or questions on YouTube when I upload the video. Cheers.